everyone, here we go again. It's Regents Review number 8. Did any of you have an imaginary friend? Or maybe you still do. Okay, so number 1. Solve the equation x squared minus 4x plus 9 equals 0 and express the answer in a plus bi form. Notice that over here we have a plus bi. The a is the real part, the b is the imaginary part. I equals the square root of -1. Now, really all this means is solve the equation, and you're going to end up getting a complex number, or conjugates, actually. So you can solve this not graphically, because if it's in a plus bi form, it's not going to cross the x-axis. No x-intercepts to check. You cannot solve it using factoring because it's not factorable. So the only other methods are the quadratic formula or completing the square. So I'm going to complete the square, at least first. So I have x squared minus 4x. And now I'm going to take my b value, right, which is -4, divide it by 2, and square it, and I get 4. So I'm going to add 4. But I can't just add 4, I then have to subtract 4, and then bring down that plus 9 equals 0. So now I have my binomial squared is x minus 2 squared plus 5 equals 0. Remember, half of your b value goes into your binomial squared. Now I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I have x minus 2 squared equals -5. Taking the square root of both sides, I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus, and know that there's a negative under that square root, so I'm going to take that out as an I, but I still have the square root of 5, which I can't simplify. Then adding 2 to both sides, I end up with my answer, x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 5i. That's my a, my b value, okay, and that is the final answer. Now I could have used the quadratic formula also. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that would have given me x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of -20, that's 16 minus 36, over 2. Now, I need to simplify the radical first. Now, the square root of -20, remember, is the square root of 20 times the square root of -1. Square root of -1 is I, and that becomes 2 square root 5. So I end up with x equals 4 plus or minus 2 square root 5i, both divided by 2, which is how I finally get to the same answer I got over there, 2 plus or minus the square root of 5i. All right, going on to number 2. Now, number 2 is an exponential growth problem. Victoria purchased a house in 2010 for $90,000 and sold it in 2016 for $112,000. Assuming exponential growth, approximate the growth rate to the nearest hundredth of a percent. Now, exponential growth is all over the place out in the real world. You can see a couple of examples down at the bottom. Okay, we also know that the exponential growth formula is y equals ab to the x power, where a is the original amount, b is 1 plus the rate as a decimal, and x is time. All right, so let's take a look. If we're going to do this algebraically, and on the quiz you most likely will have to do it algebraically, the ending amount after 6 years is 112,000. We started at 90,000, and then it's 1 plus the rate, but the rate is what we're trying to find raised to the 6th power. And now we have to solve this equation. So we're going to divide both by 90,000. Okay, and when you divide 112,000 by 90,000, you get, oops, no, I don't know what you get actually, because I didn't write it down, so that's not cool. But in any case, I'm just going to leave it as 112,000 over 90,000. But you could put that in your calculator and get the answer. I don't have one with me, otherwise I would do it. Okay, and that equals 1 plus the rate to the 6th power. Now we're going to have to take both of these and either take the 6th root or bring it to the 1/6 power. And that's going to give us 1 plus the rate is equal to, and this I did write down. No, I did write that down before. This was 1.24 repeating. Okay, so once I take the 6th root of it, I get 1.0371, and there's a whole bunch of other numbers in there. I think 2058. We actually need some of those numbers in order to round it correctly. Now I'm going to subtract 1 from each side, and I have the rate equals 0.0371258. And it says to round to the nearest hundredth of a percent, so we have to multiply by 100, and we get 3.712,058. And it says to round to the hundredth place. So if you look to the right of the hundredths place or the thousandths place, it's a 2. So we don't have to change any numbers. The final answer is going to be 3.71%. Now remember, you can check your work, or if you're not doing it algebraically and this is a Regents question or a multiple choice question, you can go into list 1 and list 2 in your calculator, and you can put in 0 and 6. 2010 would be times 0, and 2016 would be times 6. And then you can go ahead and put in your 90,000 and your 112,000, and you would hit your second. No, you wouldn't hit second. It's calc. You're calculating, you're calculating the exponential regression. So you would have to go into stat and then go over to calc and then go down to exponential regression. And if you did that, you would get your B value, and your B value would be 0.0371 and all those numbers there. And then you'd be able to multiply that by 100 again to get your 3.71%. Okay. Number 3. Which function shown below has a smaller average rate of change? Well, remember, average rate of change is the slope formula. The change in y over the change in x. So we're looking at two different functions. This one over here, we could just put in our calculator. And since the interval is -1 and 1, that's our x1 and our x2. But we need to find out what our y values are. So when I go ahead and put this in my calculator, my y value at -1 is 3/4, and my y value at 1 is 4/3. So if I go ahead and do the slope formula, it would be 4/3 minus 3/4 divided by, those are my change of y's, 1 minus negative 1. So I end up getting 7 over 24, which would come out to be a decimal. If you wanted to go ahead and divide it, it comes out to be something like 0.29 something. Okay, now over here, I'm going to look at my g of x, and I'm going to only look at the interval between negative 1 and positive 1. And again, it's just the change in y over the change of x. So it's going to be 15 minus 7 over 1 minus negative 1, which is going to be 8 over 2, which is 4. And 4 is a whole lot bigger than a fraction, 7/24 or 0.29. So the one with the smaller average rate of change would be f of x. All right. Number 4. Oh, I forgot to put the number there. Okay, state the formula for the nth term. This is number 4. Okay, in this sequence. Now remember, if you look at the differences between arithmetic and geometric sequences, you're looking at whether you're adding a common difference or multiplying by a common ratio. Hopefully you can see here that you're multiplying by a negative 2. Again here, multiply by negative 2. That's a multiplication, by the way, not an x. All right, so we keep multiplying by negative 2. So my common ratio is negative 2. Now you can see here on your reference sheet that formula is there, and we're looking for a sub n. A sub 1 is the first term, so in this case that's a 3. The common ratio we just said was negative 2, and that's just raised to the n minus 1 power. If I wanted to find the 5th or the 6th or the 7th term, I would just replace the n for that number. Okay, one more to go. Hang in there. This is the last one. So express this fraction in simplest form using only positive exponents. All right, so remember we want to look at this. There's a numerator and there's a denominator. I'm going to look at the numbers first, the coefficients, 12 and 24. Well, that just reduces to 1/2. I'm not going to bother putting the 1 there unless I need it later. Okay, but I have the 2 down at the bottom because 12 goes into 24 twice. Now remember, when you divide, you have to subtract the exponents. So here I have, for the x's, I have negative 5 minus negative 3, which would be negative 2. Well, x to the negative 2 is equal to 1 over x squared, so I'm going to put the x squared down here at the bottom. All right, now I'm on the y's. The y's, I have 5 minus negative 2 as my exponents, and that equals 5 plus 2, which is 7. It's a positive, so I'm going to put my y to the 7th power on top. And that is my answer. Okay? All right, that's all there is for today. I hope you do well, and I hope this was helpful. Okay, I will see you soon.